All right, so this is quite a treat. We're going to be on, we're going to sit in the train, so it's going to be a lot of fun. How many of you are first time here? Oh, well, welcome to the Museum of Arts and Sciences. Great. All right, we're going to put a door stopper, and it's a really heavy door for obvious reasons. Okay, good, gotcha. I'm sorry we're not able to actually go somewhere, but it would be a lot of fun, right? It's too bad we're not headed to St. Augustine tonight or Savannah. Let me introduce myself. Oh, we got a couple more coming. My name is Zacharias. I'm the Senior Curator of Education and History here at the museum. And I've been with the museum for 29 years. I think I started when I was 10. And I was like that big. No, I'm kidding. But so welcome to the Museum of Arts and Sciences if you haven't been here before. This is a real treat because we don't normally ever open up the trains. I actually come from a train family. My great-grandfather, his name, he had an interesting name. I never met him, obviously. His name was Shorty Ford. And he ran the train out of Chicago, the People train. I have pictures of him, but I never met Shorty Ford. He was an Irishman, obviously. But I'm from Miami, so I've never been on a train. I've never been on a travel train because trains, out of Miami, you flew. You didn't go on a train. And most of the trains down there were just, cargo trains. So never really been on a train where you went from one city to the next. I've never really done that before. So someday when I get more vacation time, I'll do that. So this is the Hiawatha. So Chapman Root collected everything Americana. He collected a menu from every restaurant he ever ate at. He collected Coca-Cola. He collected race cars. He collected trains. He had 4 trains that he collected. One is still in Daytona over at where the old Kapok tree was. They had their own private family museum. I mean, it was not open to the public. And all this cultural material was in that private family museum. I got to go there one time for a Christmas party right when I started at the museum. It was really cool. And these train cars are out there. There's a dining car that's still out there, but the caboose was sold and another one was sold. When they wanted to take the collection, they were going to, for tax reasons, sell off the entire collection on this new platform called eBay. Back in the 90s. But the family decided they didn't want to see the collection broken up and sent all over the world. So they decided to come to the museum. They'd already been involved with the museum for a long time. And then they donated everything to the museum. And we took the 2 most important rail cars, which were the Hiawatha and the Silver Holly. Now, why would we want the Hiawatha? Well, because there's only 2 of these known in the world. So they built 10 of these, but of this is called a skytop lounge. Of this type of skytop lounge, they only built 4. So there's another skytop lounge. This is like the caboose. This is like be on the end of the train, the passenger train. And so one is, they don't know where it is. The other one was cut up for scrap. And then this one, and there's another one in another museum. So there's only 2 of the 4 known in the world, but they made 10. The other 6 were a little different. They had sleeping bunks and things like that, but this is called the parlor car. So they only made 4 of these parlor cars. And if you were lucky enough, when you traveled, you wore a suit, you got really dressed up, you didn't wear flip-flops, you weren't listening to Jimmy Buffett, Hawaiian shirt. I've seen photographs of people on this train. Everybody was really, dolled up. But you could come and sit here and be in the solarium. This is called the solarium. There's 24 seats plus the couches. And then this was, as I said, it's like 90% glass here. When Chapman acquired this skytop lounge, I mean, it was in bad condition. Terrible condition. It was in the Sanford train yard. It was rusted out. The seats were a mess. A lot of seats were missing. There was no carpeting. It was wood rot. And that he had it sent to Omaha to be restored. It took like a year. repainted, completely refurbished. And then eventually they finished it. And this is the incredible story. It leaves Omaha. It's like having a restored car, right? Beautiful antique restored car. You're driving it home for the first time and you get in a wreck. It was involved in a wreck. It got hit by another train from the northern Burlington. And so now it had to go back to Omaha to be re-restored again. It was hit in the back and it got crunched up like an accordion. So it had to be completely redone, at least the back end. So it took another time. Then it was brought back. At one point, all the seats, when it was in the Sanford yard, somebody came in because theft of railroad memorabilia is a big deal. And so somebody stole all the captain's chairs. So when you talk to some of the family members, they tell you these stories. So like a year later, like midnight, Chapman Root gets a call. He goes, "This is so-and-so from the FBI." And he's like, "What's wrong with one of my kids?" Because he had 6 children, right? 5 boys and 1 girl. That's a lot of holes in the plaster, right? And it's a lot of rambunctiousness, I would believe. They're great people. Great people. So nice. But, and Chapman Root was great to work for. I've given a lot of tours here. People said, "Oh, I worked for Chapman. He was fantastic." I've always just heard so many great things about the family. Know the family was great. But anyway, so he gets a call. I think something's wrong with a family member. And they're like on the phone, like, "We found your captain's chairs." Somebody had stolen them and sold them. They found them in a garage in like Ohio. So he got his chairs back. But it's been completely restored. Yeah, I know. Yeah, the FBI found them. So I didn't realize that there was a big black market for railroad memorabilia. That's, apparently that's true. People go in the middle of the night, they steal signs and things like that. But so anyway, he got all the chairs back. So that was a real plus. So this ran between, let's see, Chicago and Minneapolis, Minnesota, 400 miles in 400 minutes, or in about 7 hours. That's what it ran. I was going through my own personal family archives. As I said, I kind of come from a train family. My dad's side of the family is from Chicago, in a little train town south of Chicago called Blue Island. And it was a little town south of it. It was known for all its trains. And I was going through the archives, and there was a letter from my grandmother who I never met. I never met any of my grandparents. And her name was Grace, and she had a thank you letter for writing on this train. Wow. They wrote a thank you letter for her writing on this train. The manager did. I was like, wow. Can you imagine if you went to Publix and you shop there and then you get a letter from the manager saying, "Hey, thanks for shopping at Publix." Or from Southwest Airlines. Where did we go wrong? This is fantastic. I was just recounting a story to Angela, our great security guard, that I took 2 trips here in the last month. I flew from Austin back to Orlando, 2.5 hour flight, took 14 hours. 14 hours. Plane broke, all types of issues, right? You get to the airport at 5, you get home at 10 at night. Then I flew from Vermont to Orlando. That was 10 hours. But this, and of course, you got, whenever you fly in Orlando, you got crying babies because it's Disney and stuff like that, and screaming and yelling, right? That's the problem. There was no problem flying out there. But when you fly into Orlando, there's going to be a lot of kids on the flight, right? Because of Disney, right? On theme parks. And so I was like, and you're cramped in there, really. I'm like, and it's loud. I'm like, where did we go wrong? Now I can understand going way across the country, right? But this was a milestone in human history. Being able now, train travel is now available for middle class and lower class people. That's how the train changed our society so much. It allowed for people to move to new cities. Cities germinated along railroad tracks as well. Anybody know where the first railroad was in Florida? No. Sanford? No, it's way up in the Panhandle. from a place called St. Joseph to Apalachicola. And then the next one was from Tallahassee down to St. Mark's. That was the next one. Yeah, so these are like 1835, 1830s, early 1830s. Those were the early ones. And I believe they were steam powered. So, you had horses that were pulling rail cars as often. But time zones, we have time zones for unified time. So it connected the entire continent, the whole rail system did. In Florida's history, after the Civil War, what was needed in Florida was infrastructure. The only way you got around in Florida was the St. Johns River on steamboats. So while the steamboat had become more popular and steamships before rail travel, its nemesis, Robert Stephenson in England, is building the death nail of the steamboat travel, right? Because if you went on a steamboat from New York and you came down here as a winter tourist in like 1870, 1880, you went from New York to Charleston on a steamboat, then from Charleston to Savannah on a steamboat, and then from there, from Savannah to Jacksonville on another steamboat, and then another steamboat from Jacksonville to Palatka. And then if you wanted to go to the very southern end, then from another steamboat from Palatka to Enterprise or to Lake Monroe. That was the end of the line. Steamboats couldn't go any further south. It's too shallow. So rail travel is going to knock out steamboating. And then the nemesis for rail travel, at least especially in this country, was invented by a real daredevil. I mean, a race car driver. I mean, this guy was crazy. He was a real daredevil. And he built this automobile in like this garage, and it had no brakes. And then he realized it was too big to even get outside the doors, but he could ride it in and out around this kind of barn garage that he had. And his name was Henry Ford. He was a race car driver and a real daredevil. And he set his sights on building an automobile, a horseless carriage for the middle class. And especially now you can have personalized travel, go wherever you want, wherever there's roads, right? So he literally changed the surface of the earth. So that was sort of the death nail of the train travel. And it really kind of, you can't really, so if you had Bill Gates money and you had your own train car, right? And you call it the Microsoft Express, right? You still can't go anywhere because there aren't enough train tracks anymore. So many of them have been ripped up. So even if you had that type of money, you're really not going anywhere. So culturally, this was a big deal. It was a huge milestone, was train travel, invented by George Stephenson in England. He's really given credit for the way train travel is today. And then, of course, standard gauge became. Now, the reason they had different gauges, anybody know why? You had different gauges of track. What's that?
To prevent invasion.
Absolutely. Wow. I can't believe you got that right. That's good.
I live near Canada.
Okay, yeah, that was to prevent invasion, right? So if you change the gauge or the size of the tracks, the invading train with the troops can't come into France or Belgium or wherever it's going to be. So that's why they had different gauges. Now, in Florida, where we are, eventually everything's going to be standard gauge, especially with the coming of the Henrys. In Florida, you have two Henrys, right? Henry Sanford and Henry Plant. One's going to do the east side with rail travel, and the other one's going to do the west side. That's Henry Plant. And they're going to build rail lines all the way down, basically to South Florida, and then Henry, Florida, with the Florida East Coast Railway, which you'll see a lot of that memorabilia here in the exhibit. And so he's going to build that with these resorts all the way down eventually to Key West, which is considered the eighth wonder of the world. Now, this train was considered the perfect rail car for a perfect line, or the perfect ending for a perfect train. That's how they marketed this rail line. It ran from 1948. It's a streamliner, and it ran to 1970. And that's how long it ran for. So, as I said, there's only two of these known in the world of this type of skytop parlor lounge. And this is the original color. The color scheme on the outside is the original color. The other one has blue seats, kind of a blue interior. And then this one has more of this garnet color. I'm not sure if this garnet color was original. I'm not sure if anybody knows exactly for sure. So when we first had this put into the gallery, this was an open pavilion. And so I'm so glad that we're able to enclose it and air condition it, because we are still close to the coastline and it is still very salty air here. So it was having some rust issues. So we're really glad that the Root family decided we would enclose this, air condition it, and then re-restore some of the trains. Of course, there was minor restoration compared to what was happening. The Silver Holly across the way there is their personal rail car that they ran in the late 60s and 70s. It had 78 seats. It too was sent to Omaha, I believe. And then after about a year and a half, it was basically turned into their own private condo or hotel on rails. And they would take that rail car everywhere and anywhere they wanted to go. They usually would hook up to the back of an Amtrak train, and they would be like the caboose on the back. One time, they were put into the middle of the train, and Chapman Root came down from the top of the game. That's the game room or the observation deck. And he came down there, and there was a gentleman sitting in the lounge there, and he ordered a drink. He ordered a cocktail. Because this time they had put the train in the middle, so people were traversing the train thinking that this was some type of a bar or a lounge car. And so it's not. And so he made the guy a drink, and then eventually told me this is a private rail car, and so that's sort of what happened. This was usually hooked up at the very end as well, and Chapman would put a big piece of blocky furniture in the very back because there was a door, and he didn't want the kids to open the door and then fall out the back. So he always had like a big piece of furniture blocking the door, which is me. How much did he pay to hook up with Amtrak? Sometimes it was just, you had to buy a certain amount of tickets. So I know in one case, they would have to buy 26 travel tickets and then they would hook up the train car, but it just varied on the line. They would go to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. They would go out to the Southwest. That is why you see Southwest motif in the living room when we go over there in a few minutes, because Susan Root loves Southwest decor. And that's why you see that in the living room. So they gutted it. Susan Root insisted, 5 boys, right? 1 girl and her, that there'd be a him and a hers bathroom. So there's going to be a private bath just for the 2 ladies, and the boys all men can have their own bathroom. So she insisted on that, insisted on a kitchen as well. There's bunk beds in there. There's a master bed as well. The top part, as I said, is original. It's a Zephyr car. That is original. And that's where a lot of the family spent time up there. They loved to play like board games. And their favorite game was gin rummy. They loved cards, and they would play that. Now, they weren't allowed to go up there until they were out of the city. Now, why was that? So the kids would go up, once the train took off, the kids would go up there and they would start to play. So so Preston Root said, eventually we were not allowed to go up there until we were out in the countryside, and here's why. When they were going through Chicago at one point, somebody threw a cinder block off of a bridge down onto the train, and it crashed through their window. And so nobody was hurt, but they were not, at that point, they were not ever allowed to go through the city again up there until they got out to the countryside. Holly was a family friend who worked for the Burlington Northern Railroad, who passed away early in her life. And that's where they came up with the name Holly. So these are streamliners. So what is streamlining? Streamlining was popular in the 40s and 50s. It's the last incarnation of a style of art called Art Deco. And in Art Deco, you have streamlining, but a lot of ornamentation. But when you get to the streamlining, they take out the ornamentation and you're just left with the beautiful curvy lines. And you see a lot of that. The Streamline Hotel in Daytona, which is the oldest operating hotel, there's a reason why it's called the Streamline, right? Because it has the streamline, but none of the ornamentation like you would see on some of the hotels in Miami, on South Beach, where you'll see the streamline, but you'll see ornamentation with it as well. So this is sort of the last incarnation. The race cars, same deal, streamliners to break the wind and cheat that wind so you can be more efficient. This could do a maximum of about 120 miles an hour, although I don't think they ever pulled the line ever went 120 miles an hour, but that's what I was told. There used to be about 10 other cars, passenger cars, attached to this one as well. But anyway, one other quick thing before we go. When the railroads came into Florida, and Henry Flagler and Henry Plant, then you had Henry Sanford, then you had Henry DeLand. It's good to name your kid Henry back in the Gilded Age, right? You're being really wealthy, right? But anyway, what's interesting is that when these rail lines came and they were really marketing to a northern wealthy clientele, it brought in northern values and northern culture. So although we're southern by birth in Florida, culturally we're very north. You know this, right? You've been on I-95 and crossed over the St. Mary's River, headed north on I-95, and all of a sudden now you're in Georgia and you're like, I'm in the South now. Even though you were really in the South, you're like, I'm in the South now, you know? And culturally, it's different. So it really brought in a lot of northern values and northern culture. And it kind of made this dividing line as well, where the wealthier side was on the east side of the tracks, the less wealthier side was on the west side of the tracks. And that's definitely true in Miami, where I grew up, in a lot of places as well. So all these mega fantasy resorts that these two industrialists built, some of them obviously are still around. The Breakers in Palm Beach, the Ponce de Leon, which is Flagler College, the Alcazar, the Tampa Bay Hotel for Henry Plant is still there. That's now part of Tampa University. These are all pretty incredible places. Have any questions before we go into the rain car?
Could you pause there for just one moment?
We will pause.
After you, my dear.
Coming down.
Well, because there won't be enough room.
When's the bar car open?
Right up there.
Just be careful coming down. Yeah, I know. Just watch your step coming down for sure.
Thank you. That'll be worth it.
So just remember, this was a regular passenger car, a Zephyr line that had 78 seats in it. So
Oh, the seats up there, I see.
yeah, that's original.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the beds, that was all.
No, the bunk beds were for the boys. The one pull-out bed was the girls' room, the daughter's room. And then the first bedroom you saw was the master bedroom, even though it was a tiny little bed. It's like pretty cramped for a husband and wife, if you ask me. But it must have been fun.